Tonight's show is brought to you by the Wild Wild West, Vendetti Optics, and you, our listeners. As we say in Oklahoma, by the will of God, Oklahoma will always sit atop Texas. What is up, all of you wayward souls, and welcome back to the Wayward Stories podcast. Wayward Stories is the podcast where we tell the tales of our adventures and our wanderings and our wonderings. How's everybody doing? Are you all enjoying your holiday season, whatever holidays you might celebrate? It is definitely that time of year. Winter is in full swing, and we've had some pretty cold days down here in Arkansas. And my employers have not got me my long breeches yet. You know, we got to wear uniforms, right? And they come from a supplier, which I won't name, who is being very slow to getting my pants to me. So I'm running around in shorts, freezing my tuchus off. And it's been interesting so far. Fortunately, we have pretty mild winters in Arkansas, but we've had a couple of really cold days that I was not feeling it. And anyway, so far, it's been an eventful cold season for me, particularly. Anyway, how's everyone doing? We're in the studio. Look at us go. This will be only 1 month to another episode. We're speeding up, but we're going to slow down again because once the spring semester kicks in, all bets are off for the next 10 months. We don't even know what'll happen. However, we shall see, because there may be a big adventure coming up over Christmas break when you may be listening to this. I think I have the most free days straight since all the bad stuff happened back 7 years ago, where even though I can't afford it, I have almost 7 full days of absolute and complete freedom, starting with Christmas Day. And there's a part of my soul that says, throw caution to the wind, oh wayward son. Carry on, right? We'll see what happens. But if we do, there'll be another episode then. But tonight, we're going to talk about my birthday road trip, the one I take every year. And I'm excited to talk about this. I only had 3 days to work with. It was a little bit compressed, but it was a great road trip. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Before we get there, housekeeping. You guys all please go like and subscribe. Please rate us wherever you listen to podcasts. The ratings are enormously huge, important for us. And, the reviews are. The rating's good, but the review is better. So please do that. And if you don't, well, Merry Christmas to you anyway. Grinch. Anyway, let's get on with tonight's show. So what are we going to talk about? Well, you remember in the last episode, kind of exploring the western frontier, we went out to eastern Kansas, which is not that far from me, and we started exploring some of the earliest frontiers of the Wild West in a little road trip. Well, this week we are going to pick back up within the same theme, and this week we're going out further west, and we are going to explore the Santa Fe Trail. It's going to be super cool. And one of the things we're going to talk about tonight is some of the raiders back in those bad, the bad old days. Everyone talks about the good old days. Historian here, no, they were worse than now. But anyway, we're going to talk about some of the raiders, and I meant to work some of those in last week. It was kind of a thematic thing for me, or say not last week, last episode, and I forgot to do that. But I did intend to, and I wanted to correct this tonight. Talk about Quantrill's raiders for about 5 seconds. You may have heard of them, you may not have, but they had to do with that whole Bleeding Kansas Fair and the Civil War that followed soon after. And one Jesse James, whom you may have heard of, rode with one William Clark Quantrill in Quantrill's Raiders. And so that is one other kind of deep history aspect of eastern Kansas and the Fort Scott affairs that occurred over there. So I wanted to work that in before we got started tonight. That was an oversight on my part. A lot of times I forget things and I don't remember them until I'm listening to the episode in editing. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going back and turning the studio back on to record this one thing I forgot. I've done it before. It's a pain in the butt, and it's got to be super important for me to do that. I don't have time to mess with all that. Ain't nobody got time for that. So anyway, with that out of the way, what did this road trip look like? Well, you know what? I'm going to give you an upfront number, just like I did on the Vicksburg trip. This little adventure, 3 days of adventure, like 700, 800 miles round trip from here to essentially Fort Dodge, Dodge City, Kansas, on through southeast Colorado and down into northeast New Mexico, cost a grand total of about $270-ish, which is something I will pay all day, every day for a road trip into the wild, wild west. That's actually an extremely absorbable amount of money, and we're going to talk about it as we go, how much it cost. I will say right up front, first and foremost, Subaru to the rescue, 35.9 miles to the gallon on the highways. That's maybe the number one reason this trip came off so cheap, and I ate smart. That was a big part of it too. But $270-ish, and that's with a couple of nights of a hotel stay. So understand that. And we're going to talk about that little hotel in a minute, because it's a really cool place to stay up in that area. Anyway, Santa Fe Trail. What's the big deal about the Santa Fe Trail? Well, it's very, very, very famous, of course. It's a huge trade route in the very early days of expanding to the west. It went from roughly, it says here, Old Franklin in Missouri, which is somewhat east of Independence in that general area. And it traveled all the way across Kansas, all the way through the southeastern portion of Colorado, and all the way on down to Santa Fe, as you might imagine. The Santa Fe Trail, right? It's about 900 miles long. And it's one of those things you could turn into a really cool road trip if you were of the mind. Now, I only did roughly, God, really looking at it, I would say we did a quarter of it. Probably about a quarter of it, maybe a third of it, maybe a little more than a quarter of it. That's actually a lot more than I thought we did. No, it's probably about a quarter. But anyway, it's a 900-mile long trail. It is a national trails, National Park Service administered National Trails historic route. You can get a stamp for it for your National Parks book at any of the sites that are National Parks administered along the way. And there's several places to check out as you go. Like, there's several places where you can see some of the original ruts or the original swales of the Santa Fe Trail, where all these people were going out west for trade, for expansion, for you name it. Anything we were doing as we were manifesting our destiny across the face of this country, a lot of it happened along the Santa Fe Trail. So we're going to explore several places as we go along. And we didn't exactly do it in, it wouldn't be chronological order, but say geographical order from east to west. We kind of started right in the middle of it because I had a very particular place I wanted to check out. And then went back to the east and then came all the way back down to the west, in this trip. And so it's very cool. We're just going to go day by day. So day one, start out on my birthday, very early, and make essentially an 11-hour drive to La Junta, Colorado. Now, La Junta is spelled L-A-J-U-N-T-A. That is that proper Spanish pronunciation. It's not La Junta, it's La Junta. And anyway, La Junta is a perfect place to kind of set up to explore this general region of southeast Colorado into northeast New Mexico. Like, it's really gorgeous out there. But day one of the road trip was actually pretty cool. You might imagine, like, oh, you're going to be driving all across these plains, and that's 11 hours of misery, if you ask me. It's not like that. It's not all that bad. One thing people misunderstand about Oklahoma, for example, I'm leaving from Fort Smith. I'm heading down I-40 at least to Oklahoma City. From here to Oklahoma City, it's not that boring. You're still in the green country of Oklahoma. There's still trees everywhere. There's still lots of rolling foothills. There's some higher hills. There's rivers to cross. There's lakes everywhere. It's actually a really pretty drive all the way to Oklahoma City. Maybe the last 30 minutes, it really starts to turn into that type of prairie land. On the other side of Oklahoma City, going to where we went in La Junta, you start up at a northwesterly jaunt across a lot of the back roads and some of those state highways that go up through there. And being quite honest with you, it's actually really visually pretty striking. The high prairies are actually quite pretty. Number one, there is the visual aspect of all the enormous wind farms. And believe it or not, wind farms are actually somehow really fascinating to drive within. When you get really close underneath one, It's crazy how extremely large they actually are. But also up in that area in those high plains, it's a lot more rolling than you might think. There are a lot more rolling hills. And about the time we were getting there for the day, driving in northwestern Oklahoma up through the panhandle, it was actually a really gorgeous time of day to be doing it. Right now it's getting dark at 5:30. So, it was magic hour most of the time going through the Oklahoma panhandle. So there was so much to see. One of the first things that you run into if you take this trip, as I did, out into that area is we were going through Black Mesa, essentially, right through Black Mesa State Park or right close to it. And Black Mesa is the highest point in Oklahoma, and it's a little branch of Black Mesa, which just so turns out to be, this is the coolest thing ever. Geology is getting more and more interesting to me. But Black Mesa is essentially an ancient lava flow from a volcano up somewhere in the general region of southeast Colorado that put out so much lava it filled an ancient river valley 1 billion years ago. And then over 1 trillion billion years, everything erodes down. Well, volcanic rock is extremely hard. So it's what's left. So something, a material that filled up a river valley and was the low point a way long time ago is now the high point because everything else eroded down around it, and it's what's left standing out over the horizon. And it branches out into New Mexico. It's through Colorado. It's through maybe possibly a portion of Kansas. It's definitely in the Oklahoma Panhandle because it's Oklahoma's high point. Fascinating. Something you need to know is don't go out there thinking you're going to drive to Oklahoma's high point and say, I've been to Oklahoma's high point. It's actually a 4-mile hike, and you will gain 800 feet on your way to the top of it. It's a really, really interesting place because not only is it Oklahoma's high point, and it's a really kind of gorgeous landscape in the way that, Mars is kind of a foreign landscape. I'm just being honest here, but it is really pretty, and there's a canyon involved. I mean, you have to hike 4 miles and you gain 800 feet. You hike to the top of this mesa, so the views are striking. But it's also an area that has to do with the Wild West. Have you ever heard of Black Jack Ketchum? Probably not. Have you ever heard of William Coe? Probably not. But have you ever heard of the Hole in the Wall gang? Butch Cassidy, the Wild Bunch, some of the most famous outlaws to ever ride out in the Wild West. Well, these two guys were a part of the Hole in the Wall gang. And they had a hideout called Robber's Roost, and that's where all these guys hung out. And it's right there, in the Oklahoma Panhandle, right there in Black Mesa. Here's the thing. Robber's Roost, unfortunately, is off limits. It's on private land, but they know where it is. It is recorded as a historic location. And when you are there, you're on the landscape of where, maybe I'm preaching to the wrong crowd, right? I say some of these names, and I'm like, everyone's heard of Butch Cassidy, and everyone's heard of Jesse James. But I mean, I don't know who all's listening to me. If you guys are 20 years old, maybe you have no effing clue what I'm talking about. I only know a lot of these names. Well, one, because I do like history, but that's not why. I started hearing them when I was a child, and that would have been from my parents' generation and my grandparents' generation, right? They were still pop culturally known. So maybe it'd be for you guys, it's you know who NSYNC is and the Backstreet Boys, but you don't know anything about them and you don't care. That's kind of how we were with all these Old West legends and John Wayne and all that when I was a kid. It's oh yeah, everyone's heard of them because all the old people talk about them at some point or another. It's still a part of the zeitgeist, but I don't really care. It's not my thing. So maybe we're too many generations removed now, and maybe many of you have no freaking clue what I'm talking about. But it's super famous history stuff. Let's just put it that way. It's a big dang deal. So if any of you are spaghetti Western fans out there, you've ever watched any of those old Westerns and you see them out in the desert and they're rooting and they're tooting and they're shooting, these are the guys those stories are based on. These are the real humans that inspired those stories. And you can go out there and stand and walk and hike through the landscape where a lot of these things happened. And it really does give you, a greater depth of understanding of what was being portrayed and say those fond memories of your childhood watching those old Westerns growing up or whatever the heck. I never actually watched those Westerns, but I'm an alive human in America that lived through the 1980s. You couldn't miss them, right? Black Mesa State Park. Pretty cool place. Oklahoma's highest point. A place to get your Oklahoma State Park stamp. An Oklahoma State Park stamp system. Arkansas's is cool. You get a sticker after like 10. You get a deck of cards after like 25 or something. And you get a t-shirt at the end when you get all 50, however many of them. Oklahoma, basically every 6 state parks, you get this really cool little metal medallion. My daughter and I just completed our first 6th, and we're waiting on our buffalo medallion in the mail. All these little passport setups through all these places, all these state parks and things, they're super fun, guys. You can get these little, it's cool. It's cool. It's something for you to think about. But you can get your stamp for Black Mesa State Park there. You can see a little bit of the Wild West, some of its lore and history, and also apparently dinosaur tracks. You may have to go looking for those. I didn't pull the info on that, but I know I wrote it down as a note as something that was touted as being visible there in Black Mesa State Park. But that was day 1, heading up. But here, it gets even better because we're getting into magic hour. As we're passing through the Oklahoma Panhandle, we're starting to cross over into Kansas, or actually southern Colorado, and we're getting closer to La Junta. All along the way, this is one of the coolest parts to me, guys. I don't have an outline tonight. I'm actually going out of my travel journal because I thought I'd drawn an outline a week ago. Apparently I didn't, and I don't have time to go through an outline. Well, this travel journal is essentially an outline. I keep up with it every day so that I can remember all the dang things that get done because I do a lot. When I road trip, I go cojones to the wall. It's just the nature of being an adult with like 3 days to work with and lots that you want to do, right? But one of the biggest things that stood out to me, the photography opportunities are killer for any of you who are into photography. It's super, super beautiful landscape. And I'm not kidding about this. You come across all these abandoned sod houses, clapboard houses, farmsteads, water wells, like, you know, the windmills, the old ones that are like famous in farm artwork. And those are, maybe a lot of you may not know this, those windmills weren't just there to look cool. They actually drove a geared system that pumped water out of the ground into usually a reservoir next to them for the cattle to drink from. Those things are everywhere up there. And a great many of them are still in very good repair, quite honestly. Like, it's very arid up there, right? So they don't actually do a lot of weathering, not a lot of rusting. I mean, that also explains a lot of these clapboard houses that are still standing. They have no windows, they have no doors. Many of them, if any of you, say you had American history in college or high school, and you learned about the Dust Bowl, and you saw some of those famous pictures that come from the Dust Bowl era, these are those houses. So it wouldn't surprise me if some of them, many of them, haven't been abandoned since those days, since the 1920s or 30s or 40s. Guys, it was really cool. Like, imagine this. You're a photographer. You're cutting across the prairie, verdant prairies, with that waving wheat that really does smell sweet, by the way. With the wind sweeping down the plain. Let's just carry this on. But then right there next to the road, with a pull-off, a place to stand outside of this little rusty barbed wire fence, a shot of a freaking abandoned sod house, a clapboard house with one of those windmills in the foreground and the golden hour sunset spilling across the golden wheat. Guys, the photography opportunities are awesome, especially for abandoned things. Ooh, one of my favorite pictures. And this is what's so great about these kind of adventures where it's like, okay, we got a place to go. We got this much time. Let's just go. See what happens. Stop with whatever comes up along the way. Came across a set of abandoned railroad tracks right at sunset in the Oklahoma Panhandle. And the sky was on fire. I mean, it was pink, orange. It was beautiful. Go over to Instagram.com/waywardson119 and you will see the picture I took, and it is one of my favorite pictures I have ever taken. Absolutely gorgeous. And it ain't because I'm a great photographer. It's because nature is an amazing artist. And I did not edit those colors to be any richer than they were. It's actually presented as shot, other than me doing a little bit of cropping to square up my poor framing at the time. But with those railroad tracks, with the grass in between them, going off into the sunset essentially, and then you can see the oranges and the pinks of that sunset reflecting in the top of these old rails. Oh my God, it's a beautiful picture. I love it. I'm going to put it on canvas or something. So if you're into photography, especially like abandoned photography, abandoned structures, guys, there are freaking grain silos every 8 miles. I actually started setting the odometer. Or didn't set it. I was paying attention to it because there are long, straight stretches, straight as an arrow, directly east to west or north to south. You might go 35 miles straight stretch. I started noticing there was a real rhythm to how often I came across an enormous grain silo across an abandoned railroad grade. Because keeping in mind, grain is one of those things that built America. And there were railroads that basically served all of these centers. And that's why these towns would have even sprang up, was to basically serve the farmers, to take in all their grain to sell off to market that would have loaded onto the trains. And I bet there's some kind of rhyme or reason to the distance between them, because about every 8 to 12 miles, there was another small town that was dead and desolate, but had an enormous rotting grain silo in it. Great photographic opportunities. Super fun drive. But that was essentially day one, was to drive down 40 and from Oklahoma City up into Colorado to La Junta, up through no man's land, the traditional historic no man's land of western Oklahoma's panhandle. And it was quite honestly very extremely beautiful. One of the few places I've never been in Oklahoma. I've never been in the panhandle. And I kind of expect it to be a lot like Kansas, or kind of deserty like a lot of North Texas. Because, Oklahoma's panhandle sets on top of Texas's panhandle. As we say in Oklahoma, by the will of God, Oklahoma will always set atop Texas. Anyway, it's beautiful. It's actually really gorgeous. I mean, I guess at least if you have an eye for it. If you're one of those people that needs TikTok on 24/7 to keep you entertained, it might not do anything for you. But anyone that's out there paying attention, has an eye for art, it's beautiful. Or nature even. It's a beautiful drive. Also, by the way, the hawks out there, like hawks, bird hawks, they are enormous compared to the hawks where I live here in western Arkansas. I mean, I'm not kidding. Like, they're noticeably larger. I thought it was freaking eagle, one of them. I was like, that is an enormous. They're hawks. I don't know what they're eating out there, but they're eating well. Apparently, it's a golden corral for hawks out in that general area. They're enormous. Maybe they're a different breed of hawk. I'm not a biologist. Anyway, it was a super beautiful drive. Absolutely loved it. And then arrived in La Junta. And I'll go ahead and tell you now, managed to find a place, and then we'll get into like the rest of this in the second half of the episode. We're kind of pushing on now. But stayed at where are we at? I wrote it down. The Stagecoach Inn in La Junta. Now, Stagecoach Inn. What's up with the Stagecoach Inn? Well, it was $56 a night's what's up with it. And you might think, oh my God, there's no way I could stay there. Like, listen, man, I ain't about bed bugs. I ain't about all that crappy, trashy stuff. Yes, $56 is a freaking steal. It absolutely is. But I've tried to tell you guys before about how to read Google reviews. When you review something, for one thing, if it's anywhere at 4 stars or above out of 5 and it's got more than a few hundred reviews, it's probably pretty solid. That's your first indicator. But when you go look at the reviews, make sure and click sort by newest or most recent first, and go read the most recent reviews and look at whatever photos are with the most recent reviews. That's where you get the true picture. I've been catfished by hotels before, where the things that come up at the top are like, the staff was wonderful and things are great. You get there, it's a pile of crap. And then you go look at the reviews like, what the hell's going on here? And you see that the best reviews were 4 years ago. And apparently there was some change of management or some change of policy, and it's been crap ever since. And the most recent reviews are all 1 star with pictures of like freaking rats the size of possums crawling out of the closet. Like, always put most recent first, and you can get a good idea. In this Stagecoach Inn, the reason I wanted to tell you about it is somewhat dated, but it is absolutely spotless, and the people are so friendly. It was a great stay. I would stay there if they were all over America in exactly that condition. I would stay there any day of the week for $56 a night. Like, that is a steal for the cleanliness and the amenities that were there. It was just a good place to sleep and not get murdered or mugged. Like, quite honestly, it was a good stay. So put that in your little noggin for any trips you may take out to Southeast Colorado. The Stagecoach Inn was a great stay as of November 2024, at least. Anyway, that was day one. Got to the hotel and we were exhausted. Absolutely exhausted. That was a lot of driving and also a lot of stopping and taking pictures. And speaking of taking pictures, don't be Justin. I made the mistake of, I made sure to bring my camera, made sure I had my memory card. I've made that mistake before. I've lost entire days worth of awesome pictures because I didn't never get to take them. Because when I got there, I realized I left the memory card in the card, connection that goes to the phone, and completely didn't have a way to take photos other than on my phone. And of course, we have learned iPhones can take pretty photos for the size of a Instagram scroll. But upon closer inspection, they're crap. You know, a good camera is worth its weight in gold because the amount of detail it picks up. But what Justin did do this time is forgot to bring the battery charger. Had the battery, had the card, forgot the charger. So I had to be very, very efficient and very sparing with the photos I took. And I did manage to make it last 3 days and only missed a little bit of the last day. And I was okay with that. And we'll talk about the last day a little bit more in a minute. So before we get to break, let me tell you real quick why I chose La Junta as kind of a base camp for this little adventure. Because it wasn't intended to be a full driving tour. It was more intended to be kind of a destination thing. Like, go stay here, and it's very central to several things. And there are several things that I could have chosen to check out. It is central to Bent's Old Fort National Historic Site. It is central to Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site. It is central to the Sangre de Cristo Mountains over in New Mexico and Colorado, where the Rocky Mountains start to climb in that general region. Raton, New Mexico, and Raton Pass, just a couple hours away. Dodge City, Boot Hill, Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, the good old Wild Wild West, just a couple hours away. It is central to a whole lot of the Wild West lore. The major prominent figures, the Santa Fe Trail. We're on the Santa Fe Trail here in La Junta. Like, this is very central to a lot of things. Even, I believe Pikes Peak wasn't that far distant. I think it was just a couple of hours away, which didn't choose to do that. And that's not really what I was out there for. And they had so much snow you couldn't drive to the top. Did figure that out because I did at least consider it when I found out how close I truly was to it. But it's very central location. So La Junta is a great central location for exploring all over southeast Colorado, the Oklahoma Panhandle, western Kansas, northeast New Mexico. Like, it's actually a really beautiful location with a whole lot of really interesting things to do. So La Junta is a great place to put on your list as a central location to go and explore from as a base camp. And as it turns out, they've got a nice little hotel for an incredibly reasonable rate to help make your adventure a lot cheaper, but also very nice for what you're paying for it. It was clean. That's all I can say. It was clean. And that's a lot more than I can say for a lot of things and a lot of people I know these days. Anyway, let's head to commercial break. And when we come back, we'll get started on our adventures for the next 2 days. And I'll tell you all about the things that we discovered along the way. We'll be right back. What is up, all of you wayward souls? I want to tell you guys about our newest sponsor, Bendetti Optics, a brand based right here in the good old US of A, Portland, Oregon, to be exact. And I bought my first pair of Bendetti sunglasses about 1.5 years ago and fell in love with them, so much so that I got online and ordered a couple of more pair. And when I did, there was a small shipping snafu, an order fulfillment snafu, and I got on the phone, gave them a call, and guess what? I get a call back from who? One of the big men themselves, right there in Portland,
from the top of the chain, have a great conversation, and we end up starting this great relationship we have. They more than made right the little snafu that occurred. And I am now a huge proponent of them because I can tell you from personal experience, they are good people. And they're trying to compete with the big boys out there, coming in at a price point of about $40, but using the exact same frame material, TR90, and the same polarization process as the big guys. As it turns out, something I think we are already probably knew in our hearts, when you buy big name sunglasses, you're buying a big name, not necessarily any more quality than you can get somewhere else, like at Bendetti Optics. They have 29 different styles. They have multiple polarization options for whatever climate you happen to live in. And they back it up with like this lifetime guarantee that if your dog eats your sunglasses, it doesn't matter how you break them, send it back in with a check to cover shipping and handling, and you're golden. You got a new pair on the way. These guys are truly trying to do it right. And they have this philosophy that a really good pair of sunglasses should not cost you so much that you are afraid to wear them. And I think all of us outdoorsmen can relate to that. So if you guys, like me, are very practical and like to get more bang for your buck and wear some great looking sunglasses, check out BendettiOptics.com. That's Bendetti optics.com, or you can go over to Instagram /Bendetti Optics. And that I highly suggest, whether you buy a pair or not, just to check out the cutest pupper you will ever see modeling sunglasses. Once again, that's BendettiOptics.com, and make sure and let them know Wayward Story sent you.
And welcome back. Thank you guys for sticking around through our sponsor break. All right, so day 2 begins, and it's 12 degrees outside. That was a great start. Thank God for Clementine and her heated seats. I kicked those guys on and let them heat up good and proper before I put my timid little tushy into that seat to take off for the day. Started out before daylight and headed actually east. Why? Wanted to go to the far end of things and start my way back. And what was number 1 on the list was a place called Bent's Old Fort National Historic Site. BENT''S, Bent's. What it was a major outpost on the Santa Fe Trail, and it is now preserved and interpreted in vivid color living history. We're talking park staff in period costume. This is really, really cool. Unfortunately, they were not when I was there because we're in the off season. During the on season, which most of you would probably be wanting to go during the summer months, everyone there is doing the things of the time in period attire. And they're able to interpret to you the things they're doing, why they're doing it, what's going on around the region. Super cool place. It is basically a large adobe fort. It screams Southwest. Absolutely screams Southwest. It's one of the coolest places I've been. But I actually started out at Bent's New Fort, which is also a National Historic Protected Property, but there's nothing there except for the foundations of Bent's New Fort. And that's like a complicated tale that I will leave for you to research for yourself or go out there and see to keep tonight's episode reasonably, short in length. But Bent's New Fort came after Bent's Old Fort, and all the things had gone south with basically westward expansion, westward trade, the relationships with the indigenous peoples of the region, the U.S. Army being jackwagons. It got really ugly over at Bent's Old Fort, and so they built a new one 40 miles upstream, and it's actually really cool, or downstream rather, and it's really cool because you can go and see all the foundations, but also stand on the rock outcroppings above the Arkansas River. Now, if any of you, my Arkansas listeners, think of Arkansas, well, the Arkansas River anyway, you think of that giant mud hole that runs right through the center of our state that's very wide and very deep. That's not the Arkansas River as a free-flowing river. That is a lock and dam system that begins in Tulsa and goes basically all the way to the Mississippi River. So we can facilitate barge traffic and trade up and down the river, right? In the old days, through our state, the Arkansas River would have looked a whole lot like it does in southeast Colorado as it runs right beneath Bent's New Fort and Old Fort. And that is a very narrow stream, a braided stream that runs through sandbars everywhere, and the water is extremely clear because it's coming straight out of the Rocky Mountains. It's actually quite beautiful. And the bluffs above the Arkansas River there at Bent's New Fort are something you can go climb around on and get really good pictures of the Arkansas River and get a really good view of a more natural state of the Arkansas River. It's pretty cool. But there's also a lot of the fort foundations for the second fort, the new fort, Bent's new fort. And it's a fun little hike. And there's a lot of wildlife to see. Saw many, many, many hawks, as I was mentioning, but also bald eagles. Kind of a plenty. There were a few, and that was really cool. It really does make me happy to see. I've been seeing so many bald eagles in the last few years, and that is a really good sign, guys. Because it wasn't that long ago, they were quite endangered, and you rarely, if ever, saw a bald eagle in this state. Remember, I'm old. Remember, I just had my birthday. I'm officially old now. Back in the day, bald eagles were not a common occurrence in a lot of places. They were a lot more endangered than they are now. That's a good sign. Started at Bent's Old Fort, and also let me get the name right here out of my journal. Prowers Bridge over the Arkansas River. It's right down by Bent's new fort, and it's an abandoned bridge, but it's right next to the modern bridge. And you can crawl out there and you can take pictures of it. And it's an old steel truss bridge over the Arkansas River, and that was another one of my favorite pictures I took. It was morning time. The sun was coming up. So I got a really cool picture of the Arkansas River beneath that bridge, from that bridge, looking out towards the east. Really cool place to go check out. So make a note of that to check out. Prowers Bridge as well. It's really good for photography if you can get the right angles. It would be better at sunset hours, but that was not the case for us that day. We were there in the morning. Now, heading back upriver to Bent's new fort. That's where I wanted to spend some time. I didn't know how much time because I didn't know what I was getting into, but my guy down at the historic site, Ranger Cody, told me I would love it there. He knows my nerdiness as well as anyone, and he wasn't wrong. Bent's new fort is amazing. Again, as I said, it was basically a trading post on the Santa Fe Trail, but it was built essentially like a fort for protection purposes, and it was built with adobe walls. So it like screams American Southwest. It screams Wild Wild West. And our traders on the Santa Fe Trail, not about as Wild West as it gets. I mean, that's right there along the lines of the cattle drives up the Chisholm Trail. It's right along the lines of heading out on the Oregon Trail. Like, it's really ingrained in American culture as a part of our westward expansion, right? This is the Old West at its finest. Now, other than being great for photography, because here's the thing, man, it really does take you there. Now, we were there in the off season. Again, we didn't have all the reenactors roaming around in period garb, talking about period things. So there were some rangers there. They were awesome. But as I wandered through there, and it was quite lonely, we were in there. It was cold as hell. It's day after Thanksgiving. It's out in the middle of nowhere. It was really cool. Had the place all to ourselves. You get back in there and you go through all these rooms that are interpreted as they would have been at the time. They're filled with trade goods. They're filled with like a blacksmith shop. They're filled with this would have been a living quarters with a fireplace, like an adobe fireplace. I got some really cool photos in Bent's as well. You can see all that over at my Instagram. Really beautiful place, but it really puts you there. And again, I grant you, I have a vivid imagination, especially because I'm a little bit of a history nerd. But you walk through some places where you're kind of in these little they're not like crawl spaces between the walls, but there's like inner walls and there's a few outer walls. It's a fairly large place. And you get back into some of these little, what you might almost call like an alleyway between the two buildings or between the walls and the main buildings. And it's really, there were just moments where I felt like I could just see it going on around me as if I were there at the time when the fort was in full swing, and there would have been soldiers about, and there would have been traders coming in with their Conestoga wagons and their freight wagons and their horses and their mules and their oxen. They have a donkey there. They had goats. They definitely had goats. Man, goat eyes are so weird. I just can't get over goat eyes. They're so weird. They also had a really, 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 really obese cat. And that was my favorite cat ever. He was so chill. He never misses a meal. Clearly, he was a very squishy kitty, and I liked him a lot. And he was hanging out in the main office where the main fireplace was. He was chilling. He was living his best life, and I assure you of that. But it's a really, really neat historic site with a lot to learn. They have a really cool gift shop. And see, that's one of the beautiful things about National Parks administered sites is their books are curated for the location. And it's not just books that someone for the national park wrote. Like, no, these are, anyone could have written these if they are considered good and they are curated and decided upon by rangers and staff of that book is a great representation of something connected to this fort. That's what's on the shelf there. So if you like to read and you go to a site that you're interested in, that bookshop is populated with books that the group of people who were the most knowledgeable about that site said this is the best books about things connected to this location. That's how our gift shop is here at Fort Smith. Like Eastern National, the manager here, she asks the rangers. They talk about it. She will pass out sometimes the books that people send as proof copies saying, hey, you should put this in your shop. And she'll give them to us to read and say, do you approve of this? What do you think of it? What are your thoughts? And get as many, opinions in addition to her own as she can. Like, my point is, these things are curated and they're specific to the site. So, like, if you like where you're at, the gift shop's a great place to go to get information on that location. It's really cool. Also, again, this is a National Historic Site, so get your National Park passport stamp. Bent's Old Fort, I highly recommend it. If you're not a history nerd, make sure to go in the summer so you at least get the full effect, what it's really, really known for, the living history aspect. If you are a history nerd, you'll love it any time of year, but it's one of those things that it may not be worth it to you to drive halfway across the country just for that, unless you're an aficionado of the Santa Fe Trail or this kind of thing. But if you're passing through the area, say you're going to Pikes Peak, a lot of folks here do that. You're going up to ski in Colorado, going up to elk hunt. A lot of people here go to hunt elk and mule deer up in Colorado. It's worth stopping by, in my humble opinion. Now, from Bent's, what happens next? Well, again, on some amount of time constraints, I had 3 days and made a 12-hour drive there. 11, it's going to be a 12-hour drive back. So most of what's happening, except for the adventure on the way to and back, which plays into this and we will talk about. But like for anything specific, it's happening today. The day after Thanksgiving, the day after my birthday. That's where anything in the region is happening. So I could have gone up to the Sand Creek Massacre site, and I am interested in that, and I do intend to go there someday, but I chose not to on this day because it's a preserved ground where a massacre happened, and I will give you just a quick overview of it. It is a very important event in U.S. history, and again, we talked about Wayward stories last week. This is a Wayward story. You'd be amazed how many people don't know about the Sand Creek Massacre. We like to not think about this stuff. Anyway, a column of riders moves up Big Sandy Creek as the village awakens on November 29th, 1864. Holy freaking crap, it just dawned on me. I would have been going up there on the freaking anniversary. That was November 29th because I drove on my birthday, November 28th. Are you flipping kidding me? Dang, I wish I'd seen that at the time. That's like the universe telling you better get up there. Anyway, November 29th, 1864. This is no ordinary village. It's a chief's village with over 750 people and at least 33 chiefs and head men of the Cheyenne and Arapaho. All believe they are safe here within the 1861 Fort Wise Treaty lands. The women think they hear buffalo approaching. The buffalo are U.S. Army soldiers. Well-trained troops of the 1st Regiment Cavalry, Colorado U.S. Volunteer, and raw recruits of the 3rd Regiment Cavalry. These soldiers have guns, and they have howitzers. A U.S. flag and a white flag of truce are flying from a lodgepole at the Cheyenne Peace Chief Black Kettle's teepee, but the soldiers are undeterred, and they open fire on the women, children, the elderly, and everyone there. And in the end, over 230 of those people were dead, including 13 council, 4 soldier chiefs. They all lie murdered. It was a bad deal. And anyway, that is a Wayward story. And it's mainly the prairie where this happened, the village site that is preserved, and it is something you can go and visit. So if you are Indigenous American, or if you're someone interested in history or want to pay respects or at least go to this site, it is there to be done as a National Historic Site. They do have like a check-in visitor center. We didn't go, so I can't tell you the full details, but you are well within driving distance of it when you're in La Junta, when you're there at Bent's Old Fort. And I wanted to give it a mention It deserves a mention for a billion different reasons, but also as a destination for your adventure if you're in that region. So we did not do that because, again, we're fighting a clock in a sense. We started super way early at the butt crack of dawn when it was 12 degrees, when it was stupid degrees outside, as it were. So we had some time to work with. So my goal from that point was I actually want to go over because I really wanted to see Raton Pass. Raton Pass is famous, like in a few different ways, but it's a famous pass on the Santa Fe Trail. It's also a famous railroad pass, and you guys know I'm a nerd about railroads, and I love the Colorado Mountain railroading scene. That's just something about that, the Denver and Rio Grande and all those things. So Raton Pass is somewhere I wanted to go. I wanted to go see Raton, and I'd never been quite to that part of northeast New Mexico. So the decision was made. We're going to just drive the actual Santa Fe National Historic Trail all the way across from where we're at Bent's Old Fort, all the way down across Raton Pass. We're going to see it with our own eyes. And then we're going to go down into Raton, and we'll figure out what the hell's in Raton, and we'll do something in Raton. So that is exactly what we did. You will not be surprised after listening to the last episode to find out that pizza is one of my favorite road trip foods because it's a very easy food and cheap food to eat, especially while you're driving, like at least particular kinds. I'm a thin crust kind of guy. I'm a thin crust kind of gal. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, so ordered a pizza as we passed back through La Junta, picked it up at the old hut. Nobody pizzas like the hut. I mean, actually, there's a lot of places that pizza a lot better, but for $7, can't beat that. That's a good hot lunch that you can easily eat as you cruise down the highway. And so we followed this National Historic Trails Santa Fe Trail route from La Junta all the way down to Raton. Main takeaways from this drive. It's essentially Highway 350 from La Junta to Trinidad. That's your first main start. And it is long and it is straight as an arrow, but it's really beautiful because the Sangre de Cristo Mountains are rising to your west as you go, and you're seeing white snow-capped mountains on the horizon, baby. Something you don't see every day in Arkansas, and that is one of my favorite things about heading west for adventures. My God. Anyway, that alone was beautiful, so you have all these beautiful verdant prairies as far as you can see until you see the mountains in the distance, and the mountains stand down there in the distance, and as you go, there's more and more and more abandoned structures. Everywhere you look, there's sod houses, there's clapboard houses, there's old schoolhouses. Got some pretty cool photos of an old schoolhouse that you're actually able to even walk in, and that was actually back up near Bent's Old Fort. But as we go down towards, across Colorado, southern Colorado, and you're getting closer to New Mexico, there's more and more of these places. And there's ruts in some places from the Santa Fe Trail that are pointed out that you can go and see for yourself. But then you start to close on Raton Pass, right? You start heading up in the mountains of Raton Pass, and it's glorious. Like, it is salve for the soul, for this old wayward son anyway. I really wonder if I lived in the desert Southwest or in the kind of the southern Colorado Rockies region when I was in a past life or something, because I just feel like I belong there. My soul is drawn there. Like, every time I get a chance to explore, I want to go there. Like, there are other places in this country I want to go that are nothing like that and see. But it is close enough, I guess, regionally, so that's part of it. But it's just something about it. I would live there, and I maybe intend to. When that part of my life gets here, I may very well go out there and live in Nevada or Utah, somewhere out there. It's just gorgeous, guys. I feel at home. I feel comfortable. I just feel like I belong out there. And crawling up through those mountains, through those passes, kind of the romance of that idea of the American West. That romance of the idea of adventure and exploration. There's just something about it. And I mean, I guess if you're extremely well read or you watch a lot of movies, maybe you understand where I'm coming from, because there is an allure, there is a mystique, there is a romance that's associated with that Wild West, with the mountains. And as I've pointed out so many times that I've probably ran some of you off that all came at a cost, a very real human cost, a blood cost to people who were completely innocent in so many ways. But it still has that other alluring side to it. Like, history is extremely complicated. Life is complicated. Humans are complicated. So while I can sit here and tell you I know the cost at which that came, we just mentioned one of those costs, the Sand Creek Massacre, it still somehow has that beautiful nostalgia to just the idea of the adventure. The adventure. It's really, really interesting. Speaking of which, I just read a book recently called The Incredible Adventures of Captain Bonneville. Captain Bonneville was a guy that was here in Fort Smith, as a matter of fact. Even his house is here in Fort Smith that belonged to his wife and his relatives. He was kind of a fixture here. He's sort of a Fort Smith native son. He was the first person to find a wagon crossing on the Oregon Trail. He went on a big adventure up in the Northwest. And just for any of you guys who were taking notes of things to, research and think about, I actually intend to put together an itinerary for a road trip that would follow Captain Bonneville's route. Like, essentially, you ever heard of the Bonneville Salt Flats? Salt Lake? That's named after him because he found it, which many indigenous peoples before him had found it, I assure you. But he was the first colonizing Anglo-American person to find it and slap a name on it in the name of, westward expansion, rah, rah, USA. But I would love to follow his. That's something to look into. And it's something for you guys to maybe look into because he saw a lot of gorgeous things. Yellowstone, like he was up there. That would be really cool. But anyway, there's a certain romance to that idea of adventure and exploration. I mean, that's what we're selling to the yuppies today, right? Be the modern day version of this. And of course, everyone's just faking it. That comes back to an episode that we'll get to eventually. I did discover what a yuppie is. Essentially, it's just a poser, at least for me. I've been hard in the paint on the yuppies for a long time and finally figured out why it is it bothers me. It's because the ones I'm talking about are just posers. And nobody likes a poser anywhere posing at anything. We like, genuineness. We like sincerity. Anyway, doesn't matter. But that's something for another episode. But anyway, Raton Pass is gorgeous. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains are gorgeous. Raton, really gorgeous. Neat little town. And one of the beautiful things about Raton, by the way, for those of you that are photographers, we've been looking at abandoned clapboard houses and sod houses and old windmills all along the way and the pictures of the American West. Raton has got several little old hotels that the aesthetic is essentially Route 66 aesthetic. You got to remember that Route 66 was what kind of made famous those ideas of those neon signs and those very particular graphics the signs were made to look like. But that wasn't like a Route 66 thing. That was actually just a stylistic choice of the time. So you will come across those things anywhere in the U.S. if it's from the proper time period. And Raton has several of those places from the proper time period. So I got some pretty cool signs of old hotels, abandoned hotels, there in Raton. But there's a couple of other things in Raton that we can talk about that I think are super cool. And I would like to here for just a second. The first one, because it's short and sweet, is the KT boundary. Any of you who are geology nerds, which probably not a lot of you, but I'm finding that I kind of am. The KT boundary refers to the geological layer marking the transition between the Cretaceous period, marked as a K, even though it's spelled with a C, and the Tertiary period, marked with a T, in Earth's history. And it is associated with a mass extinction event that wiped out most dinosaurs and is believed widely to be caused by an asteroid impact roughly 66 million years ago. It is characterized by a high concentration of iridium in the rock layer compared to the surrounding strata. It's just a few centimeters thick at the very most anywhere in the world, and it exists everywhere in the world. It was a global event. It has been identified in multiple places, and there are very few places in this world where you can go see that boundary with your own eyes in a rock cut somewhere. You have to Google it and look for them. Raton, New Mexico is one of those places. And it is on let me see what the name of the trail is. Do I have it right here? It is in Climax Canyon Park. Yes, that's what it's called. It's on the west side of Raton, and there's several hiking trails, and one of those hiking trails takes you to see that KT boundary. That's just super cool. Simple little thing, quick one-off, but how cool. Literally something I thought I would never be close enough to a place you could see it in my life, and it's right there in Raton, New Mexico. Okay, what's next in Raton? The next thing we actually found the people at the visitor center of Raton to be extremely, that little lady, she was the nicest thing, and she was so helpful. She gave us all kinds of information, and this is what visitor centers are meant to do, and she did her job well and put us on the right path to the coolest thing closest to Raton. And I told her specifically what I was after. Show me some abandoned mines, what you guys got around here. And she pointed us towards Sugarite Canyon State Park. It is a New Mexico state park, but why did she point us there? Sugarite Canyon is home to Sugarite Coal Camp. What is Sugarite Coal Camp? Well, let New Mexico State Parks tell you. Sugarite Canyon State Park. From 1912 to 1941, the St. Louis Rocky Mountain and Pacific Company recruited hundreds of workers to mine Sugarite coal. The camp housed as many as 1,000 miners and their kin, representing 19 nationalities and speaking 7 different languages. The mines were closed and the camp was torn down, but the remains left a mark on the land and the people. It was a whole town. The old kind of coal towns. Now, these were in-ground mines. These were shaft mines. So these are a lot more like the cool abandoned gold mines you think of out there. It's not like a big strip mine. This is on the side of a mountain, in the side of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, and they had a whole coal town, whole company town built there. There was a company store. There were rows and rows of houses and streets. They had a baseball field. All of that lies in ruin today for you to explore and you to take pictures of, and we did exactly that. Now, the photo opportunities are awesome. Okay, seriously, like the views, you gain quite a bit of elevation. You know what? Does it actually say? The Coal Camp Trails, self-guided trail, does not say how much elevation changes. But you go up quite a ways. There's a pretty good hike, and it has some amazing views out through the canyon to the snowy peaks in the distance out the end of the valley, and of course lots and lots of ruins, and even the entrance to one of the shaft mines. And you can go on up to the third shaft mine as well. However, you can't actually see that entrance. It has been completely covered. But anyway, the views are awesome. Now, Sugarite Canyon State Park itself has many hiking trails up to 3 miles in length, easy to moderate, and it's absolutely gorgeous. They have elk, they have mountain lion, black bears, a lot of great wildlife photography opportunities. Really beautiful place. Raton would be a great base camp for explorations into the broader region, because there are many abandoned mines out there, and you're actually getting within range of another National Historic Site, Fort Union, which had a major role to play in the Santa Fe Trail as well. And you're getting awful close to Santa Fe, which you remember from last year is a beautiful place to go explore. Also, for any of you backroaders, there happens to be an old road that is one of the old passes through Raton that goes from Sugarite Canyon State Park all the way back up into Colorado. And it was something I thought I might want to go adventure and explore, but I did get to talk to one of the camp stewards there. And he was of the mind it was the wrong time of year, that there were places that were probably solid sheets of ice, and that I probably didn't want to end my little adventure by plummeting off a icy cliff 600 feet to the valley floor below. And I agree with that. I think that's a really solid way of looking at that. So after exploring Sugarite Camp, and it was very cool, lots of great photos, it was time to head back up the road to La Junta and the Stagecoach Inn. Is this what I said? Stagecoach Inn. I don't know. I have Wagon Wheel Inn stuck in my head for some reason. Maybe that's one of the pictures I took of one of the old ones up there. But anyway, that brought to an end day 2 of my birthday adventure. We had a great day that day. Listen, just driving through those, again, prairies with the snow-capped mountains in the distance, all the abandoned structures along the way there. It's absolutely beautiful. It's very calming, and there's just freedom out there. That's what it feels like, is freedom. And I think all of us who are tied to crappy jobs and the constant, never ending rat race, the drip, drip, drip of that drop of water on your forehead torturing you, the freedom of the open road and those vast prairies and the mountains as far as the eye can see, with nothing but adventure and who knows what else to explore and to discover. That is beautiful. That is what life is all about, at least for me. So anyway, headed back up to La Junta, got dinner for the night. I'm not going to talk about dinner that night. Wanted to eat somewhere local. There wasn't really anywhere really local that was kind of kitschy or whatever, local flavor. They had fish and chips. They were okay. I'm just not going to talk much about that place because it wasn't so great. Anyway, did have best meal of the whole trip on day 3, which we're going to start now and start working our way towards wrapping up this episode. So day 3 starts very early. Again, it's like stupid degrees outside. It's very cold. Once again, Clementine comes to the rescue with her heated seats. And we headed out the Santa Fe National Historic Trail towards Dodge City. Did line this trip up in that way. Realized once we were on it, hey, you know what? If we just make a real long day of the drive day home, going to get home late, it's going to kind of suck a little, but listen, we're so damn close to Dodge City. May never be up this way again. Who knows? Got to see Dodge City, right? It is famous in the lore. Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson. It is a little bit of a picture of the Wild West, which is really interesting. The Boot Hill Cemetery is famous, right? Basically people died so fast, they buried them so fast, they buried them with their boots on. Died with their boots on, buried with their boots on. Lots of shootouts, all that. But it's kind of interesting, Dodge City, and though Wyatt Earp is associated with it, and he is very famous for the shootout at the OK Corral in Tombstone, right? There's not anything really big-time significant that happened at Dodge City with the Wild West, other than those names associated with it, and it was absolutely extremely wild. But I'm not dogging on you, Dodge City. Not at all. But what I'm saying is we're Americans, right? We have a lot of flaws, and one of them is, and maybe this is just humans in general, we like the superlatives. We like the largest, the biggest, the smallest, the fastest, the slowest, the ugliest, the prettiest. We like the most-ist of whatever it is. And Dodge City is interesting because like Tombstone is like the poster child for the Wild West, right? And even a place like Coffeeville, which we just talked about, that not nearly as many people know about, but that alone, that story, trying to rob 2 banks at once, that's insanity. Dodge City was just a really wild place. A lot of people got killed, but there was like no defining signature real moment that I can think of. Right? So it makes it just kind of like a weird little oddity, but it is one of those places. If you are into the Wild West, which I'm not actually all that much, to be really honest with you, I'm into history generally speaking. It's one of those places you have to go, right? It's a pilgrimage you have to make. You have to go see where Boot Hill was. And as it turns out, when you get there, no, you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. When you head from La Junta over to Dodge City, you are driving on the Santa Fe Trail, and there are at least 2 places between La Junta and Dodge City where you can see the original ruts or the swales of the Santa Fe Trail. One of them is on U.S. Route 400 between Lakin and Deerfield, and I couldn't get a more specific location than that. And then another one is ruts 9 miles west of Dodge City, U.S. Route 50, and they are marked where you can get out, and it even points out where to look on the landscape and what you're looking for. So you can see ruts from the actual Santa Fe Trail, and the wagons and the oxen and the horses and the settlers, the traders that trod there. It's very interesting. But then you get to Boot Hill, or Dodge City. And Boot Hill Museum is gorgeous. I'm just going to say that. I feel like I am becoming a bit of a connoisseur of museums, both good and bad. This is one of those really well done ones. They put money in it. They had great curators. They had great designers. It is an impeccable museum. It's well done. And they tell the story really well, really accurately. They include the indigenous Americans and the cost to them of all this Wild West expansion. Very well done. Wayward Son, nerdy stamp of approval for the Boot Hill Museum. It's worth the money you're going to pay to get in. I think it's like $13 a head or 16. Seemed a little pricey to me from other places, but it's gorgeous. It's really good. And they have the whole like little small town, like the front storefronts built down through the museum in the back once you gain entrance and when you go up to see where Boot Hill was. Really cool. And as you go through it, as a matter of fact, let me just look at my map here of the Boot Hill Museum and give you a rundown of it. You go in, you start in the gift shop, and of course you go through all the exhibits, and that's the part that's absolutely beautifully done. Actually, all of it is, but that's the newer curatorial type of museum part that's absolutely beautiful. Okay, when you come out the back, you're standing looking at a row of storefronts. All the way up in the back to the corner is the Cowboy Capitol building, and it has it's a museum of basically cowboy history. So it's not like really the romantic Wild West so much. It's actual real cowboys and even the show cowboys. And it's interesting if you're into that kind of thing. The cemetery exhibit is behind it. Why do I call it an exhibit? Because all the bodies were disinterred and moved elsewhere in town to the new cemetery because they were built on the side of a hill, bad piece of land in town, and they were kind of eroding out of the hill. There's a whole lot of factors involved with that, but the exhibit tells you where you can go see the people who were originally there. It tells the story of the known interments that were there and kind of gives you the whole rundown. You're standing on the historic property where Boot Hill actually was. You come back down and you start in the general store where you can buy general sundries. It's a good old-fashioned mercantile. Let me tell you something. It's like, that's a wall rods right there. You think that means every wall rods or just this one in particular? Woolworth. Why did I say wall rods? We have a wall rods here. Woolworths. I love Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? It's a great movie. Anyway, start in the general store. You can actually buy a lot of fun stuff, a lot of period stuff, rock candy, all those kinds of things. But it's also a museum of a sort. And then you start into the Long Branch Saloon where you can buy actual alcohol, but also sarsaparilla, root beer. Has a lot of really cool exhibits in it, and you work through a whole new set of museum exhibits that are all, again, beautifully done. When you finally exit back out onto the boardwalk of sort, the front porch row of this section of buildings, you can actually go into the ice cream parlor. And then there's also the Occidental Saloon and the Honorary Marshals. There's the Hardesty House and the blacksmith shop. Like, this is really cool. Okay, this is a really cool place. You could spend, especially if you're a very Wild West nerd, you could spend all damn day in here. No joke. It's really, really cool. And me, as not an extremo, like Wild West person, it's definitely not my forte or my niche, I was fascinated by it. It's super cool. Like, it's a really interesting piece of American history, and they've done a really cool job with it. And Dodge City is a pretty super cool little city, man. They've got the old Santa Fe Depot there, which is like 2 stories tall and 1 billion feet long. And if you happen to be there, if you go and visit and you happen to be there while they're having a play, you can actually see the inside of the old Santa Fe Depot. It's actually open, but it's like a theater company that basically operates it. They have a few other things in there that are kind of appointment only. Didn't get to see the inside, but it's extremely photogenic. It's a really beautiful example. And this is on the Santa Fe Railroad, which, by the way, if you like railroad stuff, there are like 1 billion Santa Fe steam engines on static display at every dang town across Kansas and Colorado. They're everywhere. Didn't stop to really take any pictures of any of those because I was more interested in other stuff and we were on a little bit of a time frame. But it was super cool. Boot Hill, it's a piece of iconic American culture. It's totally worth stopping to see, and that museum is killer. It absolutely is a killer museum. Like I said, it gets the nerdy Wayward son stamp of approval. It's really beautiful. Dodge City's totally worth checking out, and it's right there in line with that Wild West, right? We're still exploring the western frontier. That's what the Wild West was, part of the American westward frontier. Westward expansion, manifest destiny. It's all a part of that one same ball of wax, essentially. Alrighty, well, about the time, finishing up with the museum there, it was about time for a late lunch, and it was time to get back on the dang road, because there was still a lot of hours left to Fort Smith, Arkansas, which I think it was around 7 or so from there. But, started looking, they had the Cowboy Capital Saloon and Grill. It was local. You know, it kind of looked the part of every niche restaurant for those kinds of places. You know, the stuff all over the walls, probably similar kind of food, but it was definitely the best looking thing in town. And as it was, it's pretty amazing because let me tell you something. I had grown up chili cheese fries. And I say that because chili cheese fries are something you can get anywhere, something you remember from your childhood. But this is like chili cheese fries for big boys, for the big buckaroo in your life. They were so insanely good. And I know, you say, Justin, you always say, I know, I can exaggerate a little. I have a flair for the superlative, do I not? But I'm telling you, seriously, this is one of the best things I've ever eaten. It was just its own special thing. What it is, they're not French fries. They're kind of like potato wedges, like spuds. Like they kind of got that seasoned salt, kind of orangish color, but they're cut like enormous curlicues. It's like they curlicued an entire potato and they put you a plate the size of, I don't know, a wagon wheel. Like I was going to say a hubcap, but let's stay in theme here. It's an enormous plate out with like probably a whole field's worth of potatoes on it. And they cover it in what they call campfire chili and real cheese. And it was exquisite. It was like heaven exploding in your mouth. Now I'm just playing, but it was so good. It was so good. And I just figured out what I'm going to name this episode. Western Frontier, Exploring the Western Frontier Part 2. Raiders, Traders, and Campfire Taters. Yep, that's what it's going to be. Heck yeah, man. Anyway, we need to move on. We're well over time. We're towards the end of this episode, so let's wrap this up. Also, my phone's already died once, and I had to stop and let it charge, even though it's plugged in. That was a whole thing in its own right, but we're going to get this gosh darned episode done tonight if it's the last thing I do tonight. Knock on wood. Anyway, as we head home, you're going to head down Kansas 183 and 1 scenic. Kansas 183 becomes Kansas 1, and it is scenic. I have written here in my travel journal, scenic AF, and you kids will know what that means. It's very, very, very scenic. Let's just put it that way. I mean, like super photogenic. It was a beautiful drive. Absolutely loved it. When we reach Oklahoma, we hit Oklahoma 64, and we are in the Cimarron Hills. Had no idea, guys. That kind of northern, western, upper portion of Oklahoma is actually absolutely gorgeous. The Cimarron Hills are very red. Oh my gosh. And it was magic hour. Going through there right at magic hour. Sandstone bluffs, red dirt, golden fields. Like they were really rich, vibrant, contrasting colors. Like I'm not joking. This was a thing. Drive Oklahoma 64 through the Cimarron Hills. Drive it at magic hour. You will not regret it. And I also learned some things as I went down through there. In a single straight stretch on that Highway 64, I think they were all on 64, but you can Google this, so it doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong. You will pass Alabaster Caverns State Park, Little Sahara State Park, and the Great Salt Plains State Park. That alone could constitute an entire, like probably weekend adventure for you and your family, especially with kids. Alabaster Caverns, it's a state park. They have state park rangers. They do guided tours of the caverns. It's like a geologic wonderland up there in the Oklahoma Panhandle, northern Oklahoma region. Had no clue. I will go back, probably with my daughter, for these 3 state parks. Little Sahara is a bunch of freaking sand dunes. It's what it sounds like. And it's where all the people with, side-by-sides like to go. The Great Salt Plains State Park, but then there's also the Great Salt Plains Wildlife Refuge or Wildlife Management Area, and you are allowed with a permit to go in and dig for these enormous salt crystals. And these salt crystals are in the salt flats, which are left over from when Oklahoma was underneath an inland ocean, when Pangea was still a thing. Or was it that other name when it splits a little bit? Either way, a trillion billion years ago, Oklahoma was under the ocean. And these salt deposits were left. And then you have the salt fork of what the heck ever river. It may be the Arkansas River. I'd have to look into that. But it flows down in here. It's constantly replenishing, and you get all these salt marshes and you get these salt plains, and you can go up there and mine what I am given to understand are enormous salt crystals. And it's like a thing people do. So there's like a whole weekend adventure there for you and your family. Just up there in kind of north central westish Oklahoma, Alabaster Caverns, Little Sahara State Park, Great Salt Plains State Park. Sounds super freaking cool. Anyway, there's a lot to do, guys. As you can tell, and I'm telling you now, way more than I was able to do in 3 days. We adventured all the way there, adventured all the way back, and adventured friggin' like 16 hours on the main day that I was in one place for the whole time. Branching out wherever I could find. We found abandoned mines. We found Santa Fe trail ruts. We found abandoned farms to photograph. It was an awesome adventure, and the only thing that sucked about it is that 3 days is not long enough. 4 would have made it a lot better. But you know what? It was what it was. And what is this show all about? Taking every minute that this busy life gives you, when you can take it, and you make it work. And you make it happen. Because when I die someday, I may very well remember some of this adventure over those 3 days. You know what I'm not going to remember? How sore my butt got from having to drive 11 hours in one day just to get to have all those little adventures. I'm not going to remember that part. It's not how the human mind works. The memories will be left forever. You know what I would forget? Is if I'd sat at home for those 3 days and not did a damn thing but watched, I don't know, Mysteries of the Abandoned on Discovery Plus. Not going to remember that. Life is about experiences. And that's what this show is all about. And this was a good experience. Hopefully, if all goes well and life shines its light upon me, I may have another big adventure coming up in just another week. And perhaps I will be on it as you listen to this episode. Who knows? And perhaps it won't. We'll just see. And if we do, then probably the next episode will be about whatever the heck that is. So anyway, southeastern Colorado and the surrounding provinces, as it were. It's a really cool place to set as a destination point. Find a place to stay the night that's nice and clean, and explore in every direction and learn all about the way the West was won. Again, for good, bad, and ugly. Anyway, that's going to wrap us up for tonight. You guys make sure and check out our website, waywardstories.com. It's kind of the central location for anything you might want to know about the show or what you can get to right there. You go to Instagram through the website, waywardstories.com. See all these pictures. Go to our YouTube channel. Everything's right there. Other than that, we're going to call this a show because this usually 1 hour and 15, 20-minute recording session took like 4 hours because my phone died, and it's going to be a whole long night trying to edit this guy together. So I need to get on with that. You guys have a great holiday. Whatever you celebrate, or if you celebrate nothing, I hope that it is wonderful. If you are like me and you're devoid of family and things like that, do not let it get you down. I say it every year at this time. Make your own traditions. Mine have become more important to me than any of those holidays of the past ever really meant, because this is mine. It's one of the few things I've ever been able to give myself. There's an empowerment to it. It's a beautiful thing. Make your own traditions. Don't let life get you down. And if you need to talk to someone, send me an email, mywaywardstory@gmail.com, or reach out to someone that you know that you can trust to let you lay it all out there on the line. Talking about it is a good thing. Anyway, we will catch you guys on the other side of the holidays, I'm sure. Who knows when? And until then, you guys be good to each other.